The fallen angels did not fear armies. They did not fear kings. They did not even fear the flood they were warned would erase their children from the earth. According to the Book of Enoch, they feared someone else, someone who stood between heaven and judgment, someone whose name appears in the text, yet whose true identity remains one of its most debated mysteries. The ancient manuscript describes rebellious watchers descending from the heavens, taking human wives, and unleashing knowledge never meant for humanity. Their children became giants. Violence spread. The earth itself cried out. Then judgment was announced. But the watchers did something unexpected. They did not plead directly with God. They searched for an intermediary, a man they believed could approach the divine court when they could not. Why would celestial beings fear the authority carried by a human messenger? And why does the text connect this figure to titles later associated with heavenly judgment? Historians debate whether these passages describe mythology, theology, political symbolism, or memories of older Near Eastern traditions. Before this investigation ends, 3 discoveries will emerge: who the fallen angels feared, why they believed he might save them, and how one overlooked passage may change the entire story. The story begins far from crowded cities of the ancient world. Imagine a mountain ridge rising above the horizon. Cold wind moves across exposed stone. Snow lingers on the highest peaks while valleys below remain green. At sunrise, the cliffs glow gold before fading into gray. It is here, according to one of history's most mysterious books, that heaven and earth briefly crossed paths. Ancient text. The Book of Enoch introduces a group known as the Watchers. They were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. The statement is remarkably simple. No explanation, no dramatic introduction, just the arrival of beings who were never meant to leave their appointed place. Most readers move quickly past this verse, but historians pause here. Mount Hermon was not chosen at random. It stood on the northern frontier of ancient Israel, overlooking trade routes that connected Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Syria. For thousands of years, the mountain held a reputation as sacred ground. Multiple cultures associated its heights with divine beings, councils of the gods, and gateways between heaven and earth. Historical evidence. Archaeological discoveries around the Hermon region reveal temples, shrines, and inscriptions dedicated to powerful deities spanning many centuries. These remains do not prove the events described in Enoch occurred. They do, however, demonstrate that ancient people viewed this landscape as spiritually significant long before the text was copied into surviving manuscripts. Why would the author choose this particular mountain? Was it simply a familiar landmark, or was it already known as a place where humans imagined the divine world touching the earth? The question remains open. But the next passage changes everything. The Watchers were not wandering spirits. They made a decision. Ancient text. The leader of the group, often identified as Shemi Haza, speaks with unexpected caution. I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty. Instead of rushing toward rebellion, the leader worries that the others may abandon him once punishment arrives, so they bind themselves together with an oath. The mountain itself becomes the place of that covenant. The name Hermon has often been connected by later interpreters with the idea of an oath or curse, although linguists continue to debate the relationship. Mainstream scholarly view. Most scholars understand this scene as a literary explanation for the origin of evil knowledge and cosmic disorder, rather than presenting random acts of rebellion. The author emphasizes collective responsibility. Every watcher shares the guilt, because every watcher willingly swears the same oath. That detail matters. No one is forced. Everyone chooses. Why would an ancient writer place such emphasis on shared accountability? Perhaps because the consequences would soon affect every generation that followed. The descent itself is described almost quietly. There is no battle, no thunder, no heavenly war. The silence makes the moment even more unsettling. Something irreversible has begun. What comes next is even stranger. The Book of Enoch claims the Watchers did not come merely to observe humanity. They came to live among them. Ancient text. They took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. This single sentence has generated centuries of debate. Who were these beings? How should readers understand the marriages? Literal unions, symbolic corruption, a theological metaphor. The text offers little explanation before moving immediately to the consequences. Children are born, but these are no ordinary children. The offspring grow into giants. Later chapters describe them consuming enormous amounts of food before turning against animals. Then humanity itself. Violence spreads outward like cracks across ice. Historical evidence. The idea of giant heroes appears throughout the ancient Near East, Mesopotamian literature, Greek mythology, and other regional traditions all preserve stories about unusually powerful beings who blur the line between humanity and the divine. These similarities do not demonstrate that the stories describe the same historical events. They do suggest that ancient cultures wrestled with comparable questions. Where does evil begin? Why do civilizations collapse? Can forbidden knowledge become destructive? This is where historians disagree. Some researchers argue that Enoch reworked older traditions into a uniquely Jewish framework centered on divine justice. Others believe the similarities simply reflect common storytelling patterns shared across neighboring cultures. Either way, the narrative refuses to slow down. The giants are only part of the problem. The Watchers begin teaching humanity. Ancient text Azazel teaches weapons and warfare. Others teach astrology. Some reveal metalworking. Others introduce cosmetics, enchantments, herbal practices, and celestial signs. The list feels surprisingly specific. It is not knowledge itself that the text condemns. It is knowledge obtained outside the boundaries established by God. That distinction has fascinated scholars for generations. Mainstream scholarly view. Many biblical scholars interpret these teachings symbolically. Weapons represent organized violence. Certain forms of divination challenge dependence upon God. Luxury and ornamentation may symbolize pride or social corruption. The story becomes less about technology itself and more about wisdom divorced from moral responsibility. Still, another question emerges. Why does the author organize these forbidden skills into carefully separated categories? Was each watcher associated with a different kind of corruption? Or is the text presenting a broader explanation for why human civilization contains both remarkable achievements and profound suffering? No consensus exists. The mystery deepens. The earth itself is said to respond. Ancient text. The Book of Enoch declares that the cries of the victims rose into heaven. Bloodshed, injustice, and violence were no longer merely human problems. Creation itself appealed for judgment. The language echoes themes later found elsewhere in biblical literature. Where innocent blood metaphorically cries from the ground, the imagery is vivid. Dust carried by the wind. Fields left silent. Cities filled with fear. The natural world becomes a witness rather than a backdrop. Possible interpretation. Some interpreters understand this as poetic language, expressing the moral consequences of widespread violence. Others see it as part of a larger ancient worldview in which heaven, earth, and humanity formed a single interconnected order. Either reading emphasizes the same point. The rebellion affects everything. Most readers stop here. They assume the story is moving directly toward punishment instead. something unexpected interrupts the narrative before judgment falls. Heaven holds a council. Archangels observe the corruption spreading across the earth. They carry the cries of humanity before God. Only then is judgment announced. But remarkably, the watchers do not immediately disappear. They remain waiting, watching, hoping. And when they finally realize their fate cannot be avoided, they seek out one person above all others. Not a king, not a priest, not a prophet speaking before crowds. A solitary man whose relationship with heaven seemed unlike anyone else's. Why would immortal beings believe that he alone could stand between them and divine judgment? The answer becomes the turning point of the entire story. The figure they approached was Enoch. Not because he commanded an army, not because he ruled a kingdom, but because the text portrays him as someone who could cross a boundary the watchers no longer could. Ancient text. The Book of Enoch says the fallen watchers came to him in fear. They asked him to write a petition. They wanted forgiveness. They wanted their punishment reversed. Enoch agreed to carry their request before God. Then he withdrew alone. The setting is easy to overlook. He travels near the waters of Dan, south of Mount Hermon. Cold streams descend from the mountain. Mist rises above the water. The sound of movement fills the dark while the watchers wait at a distance. Enoch reads their petition. Then he falls asleep. What he sees next destroys their final hope. Ancient text. A divine response declares that the watchers will receive no peace. Their children will perish. Their knowledge will not protect them. And the beings who once watched humanity from above will be imprisoned below. The reversal is complete. The watchers believed Enoch would speak for them. Instead, he becomes the one who announces their sentence. But this is not the real twist. The real twist appears later in the book. Another figure emerges. He is called the Chosen One, the Righteous One, and, most controversially, the Son of Man. Ancient text 1 passage says that kings and powerful beings will fall before him. Another describes hidden wisdom dwelling with him. A later vision presents him seated near the Ancient of Days, participating in judgment over the wicked. This figure is not merely delivering a message. He is given authority. That difference changes everything. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars believe these passages come from a section known as the Similitudes, or Parables of Enoch. Their dating remains debated. Some place them before the rise of Christianity. Others argue for a later period. No fragments of this particular section were found among the surviving Enoch manuscripts at Qumran, which has made the discussion more complicated. Still, the complete Ethiopic tradition preserves them, and within that tradition, the identity of the Son of Man becomes increasingly difficult to separate from Enoch himself. Ancient text. Near the end of the visions, Enoch is told, "You are the Son of Man who is born for righteousness." The line is brief. Its implications are enormous. Is Enoch being identified with the heavenly judge he previously saw? Is he being transformed into that figure, or is the language symbolic? Describing his role rather than his literal identity, this is where historians disagree. Possible interpretation. Some scholars read the passage as an exaltation story. Enoch, the human mediator, is raised into the heavenly realm and given a unique status. Others argue that the text preserves multiple traditions that were combined over time. In that reading, the identities do not fit neatly because they were never originally meant to. But if Enoch and the judging Son of Man are connected, then the watchers made a devastating mistake. They asked for mercy from the very figure associated with their final judgment. They did not merely fear the punishment he announced. They may have feared what he was becoming. And that raises the larger question. Was Enoch only the messenger of heaven? Or was he being presented as something far more powerful? The story could end there. An ancient book tells of heavenly beings, forbidden knowledge, a righteous mediator, and a final judgment. It would remain one more fascinating piece of religious literature preserved through the centuries. Instead, the narrative keeps drawing historians back because fragments of its world continue to appear in unexpected places, not as proof, not as confirmation, but as echoes. Those echoes begin with a desert, historical evidence. In 1947, a series of discoveries near the Dead Sea transformed the study of ancient Judaism. Inside caves overlooking pale limestone cliffs, archaeologists uncovered what became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among biblical manuscripts, legal writings, hymns, and community rules were multiple copies of portions of the Book of Enoch. The caves were silent for nearly 2,000 years. Dry desert air had preserved brittle parchment and papyrus fragments beneath layers of dust. Sunlight reflected off the white cliffs while the Dead Sea shimmered below. Almost motionless beneath the heat, the discoveries revealed something important. The Book of Enoch was not a forgotten curiosity in the centuries before Christianity. It was widely copied. That alone surprised many scholars. Mainstream scholarly view. The Qumran discoveries demonstrated that at least parts of Enoch circulated among Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. The manuscripts also showed that the book existed in several textual forms, long before the medieval Ethiopic copies that had preserved the complete work. This did not prove every story inside the text. It demonstrated something equally valuable. Ancient readers considered it important. But another mystery appears almost immediately. The caves preserved large portions of Enoch, yet one major section seemed to be missing: the similitudes, where the mysterious Son of Man appears so prominently, have not been identified among the surviving Qumran fragments. Why? Several possibilities have been proposed. Some scholars suggest that section had not yet been written. Others argue that it simply was not preserved among the surviving fragments. Still others caution that absence of evidence should never be confused with evidence of absence. The debate continues. The evidence becomes more complicated. The geography of the story also invites closer attention. Historical evidence. Mount Hermon dominates the northern landscape between present-day Syria and Lebanon. With its southern slopes extending toward Israel, for much of the year, snow caps its highest elevations. Springs fed by melting snow become the headwaters of the Jordan River. Ancient travelers would have watched clouds gather around its summit, while lower valleys remained warm and fertile because of its height and visibility. Hermon naturally attracted religious symbolism. High mountains across the ancient Near East often represented places where heaven and earth met. Temples were built on elevated ground for similar reasons. Possible interpretation. Some researchers have noted that locating the Watchers on Mount Hermon may have been less about geography than theology. The mountain becomes a symbolic meeting place between two worlds. The similarities are intriguing, although no scholarly consensus exists regarding whether the location reflects historical memory, literary symbolism, or both. Another question follows. Why did the author choose named places instead of imaginary ones? That detail continues to fascinate historians. The next clue comes from language itself, historical evidence. The oldest surviving Enoch fragments from Qumran are written primarily in Aramaic. Later complete versions survive in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia. Greek fragments also preserve portions of the text. Every translation requires choices. Individual words may carry several meanings. Titles become especially difficult. Terms like Chosen One, Righteous One, and Son of Man can shift in emphasis depending on grammar, manuscript tradition, and historical context. Mainstream scholarly view textual scholars compare every surviving manuscript line by line. Minor variations rarely overturn the overall narrative, but they often influence interpretation. A single phrase may sound more personal in one language and more symbolic in another. This helps explain why scholars sometimes reach different conclusions while studying the same passage. Language preserves history. It also preserves ambiguity. But perhaps the most intriguing modern comparison involves ancient ideas about forbidden knowledge. Historical evidence, civilizations throughout Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and the Levant preserved stories in which divine or semi-divine beings transmitted specialized knowledge to humanity. Some traditions praised those gifts. Others warned they carried dangerous consequences. These accounts differ substantially from one another. They emerged in different cultures across many centuries, yet they reveal a recurring concern. Knowledge can elevate civilization. It can also magnify violence, inequality, or pride. Possible interpretation. Some researchers have compared the Watcher's narrative with these broader traditions, suggesting that Enoch participates in an ancient conversation about the moral responsibility attached to wisdom. The similarities are noteworthy. The differences are equally important. The Book of Enoch uniquely frames the transmission of forbidden knowledge within a story of divine accountability. The problem is not intelligence. The problem is rebellion. That distinction separates Enoch from many neighboring myths. Another mystery quietly emerges from archaeology. Ancient inscriptions across the Near East frequently describe mountains, temples, and sacred spaces as places where heavenly assemblies gathered. The imagery varies widely. Some texts describe councils of gods. Others speak of divine messengers. The cultural settings differ. Even so, the idea of a heavenly court was familiar across much of the region. Mainstream scholarly view. Most historians do not argue that these traditions describe the same events. Rather, they observe that ancient audiences already understood the literary language of heavenly assemblies. When readers encountered Enoch's visions, they entered a symbolic world that would have felt recognizable, even if the theological message differed sharply from neighboring cultures. This perspective helps explain why the Book of Enoch gained influence despite never becoming part of the biblical canon in most Jewish and Christian traditions. Its imagery spoke a language ancient readers already knew. Its conclusions challenged them, and that challenge continues today. Modern archaeology has uncovered caves, manuscripts, temples, inscriptions, and forgotten languages. Astronomy has expanded humanity's understanding of the heavens. Anthropology has shown how myths travel, adapt, and evolve across cultures. None of these fields has demonstrated that the Watchers literally descended upon Mount Hermon. Neither have they erased the significance of the story. Instead, they reveal why the Book of Enoch remains such a compelling historical document. It stands at the intersection of religion, literature, memory, and ancient imagination. And that leads to perhaps the greatest mystery of all. If this book circulated so widely among early Jewish communities, why did so many later traditions leave it behind? The answer lies not in a single decision, but in centuries of preservation, debate, and changing religious priorities. The Book of Enoch did not vanish in a single moment. No council gathered to destroy every copy. No emperor issued a universal decree against it. Its disappearance from most biblical traditions happened slowly, through changing languages, shifting religious priorities, and disagreements over which writings carried sacred authority. That history is less dramatic than conspiracy. It is also more revealing. Historical evidence during the Second Temple period. Portions of Enoch circulated among Jewish communities. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that scribes copied several sections in Aramaic. Ideas associated with Enoch also appear in early Jewish literature and in the New Testament. The letter of Jude preserves the clearest example. It includes a prophecy attributed directly to Enoch, That means at least one early Christian author expected readers to recognize the tradition. Yet recognition did not guarantee canonization. Early Jewish and Christian communities used many respected writings that were never included in their final collections of scripture. Some were read for instruction, others were valued for history, worship, or interpretation. The boundaries remained fluid for centuries, but the next detail is rarely discussed. The Book of Enoch was never one simple book. Ancient text. It contains several major sections: the Watcher's narrative, astronomical material, dream visions, parables about judgment, teachings addressed to future generations. These sections may reflect different periods, authors, and historical concerns to an ancient reader. That complexity may not have been a problem to later religious authorities. It raised difficult questions. Was the entire collection equally ancient? Did every vision come from the biblical Enoch? Should a text written under an ancient name be treated as literal authorship, inspired interpretation, or sacred tradition? This is where historians disagree. Mainstream scholarly view. Most modern scholars understand Enoch as a composite work developed across generations. Writing in the name of an ancient figure was not necessarily viewed as deception in the modern sense. It could place new teaching inside the authority of a revered tradition. Still, later communities became increasingly cautious about disputed authorship, unusual angelology, and elaborate descriptions of heaven. As Jewish religious life changed after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, other texts moved closer to the center. Among Christians, debates over doctrine and scripture also reshaped reading practices. Books widely used in one region might remain almost unknown in another. Language accelerated the divide. Aramaic copies disappeared. Greek versions survived only in fragments. In much of Europe and the Mediterranean, the complete text gradually moved beyond reach. But that was not the end. Far to the south, Ethiopian Christians preserved the entire collection in Ge'ez. Historical evidence within the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo tradition. Enoch remained scripture. It was copied by hand, read within a living religious community, and protected through centuries when most other Christians knew the book only through scattered references. The manuscript survived, not because it was rediscovered by Europe. It survived because Ethiopia never lost it. That distinction matters. The story is not simply about rejection. It is about different communities making different judgments. Possible interpretation. Some readers believe Enoch was excluded because its teachings were considered dangerous. The historical evidence supports a more complicated picture: its uncertain authorship, composite structure, limited manuscript transmission, and elaborate theology all likely influenced its reception. Different traditions weighed those factors differently. What one community regarded as inspired revelation, another treated as valuable ancient literature. And once the complete text disappeared from widely read languages, its influence became easier to overlook. By the time European scholars gained renewed access to Ethiopian manuscripts, the Book of Enoch seemed almost like a voice returning from another world. But it had never been silent. It had been speaking in a tradition most of the world had failed to hear. The Book of Enoch leaves us with several layers of truth. The first is what the text itself claims. The Watchers descend upon Mount Hermon. They swear an oath. They take human wives. They teach forbidden knowledge. Their children spread violence across the earth. When judgment is announced, they turn to Enoch. He becomes their final hope. Then their messenger becomes the voice of their condemnation. Later passages introduce a heavenly figure called the Chosen One, the Righteous One, and the Son of Man. In one of the book's most debated lines, Enoch himself appears connected to that identity. That is what the ancient text says. But historical evidence tells a more limited story. Fragments found near the Dead Sea confirm that major portions of Enoch circulated among Jewish communities before and around the time of early Christianity. Mount Hermon was genuinely regarded as sacred terrain. Ancient cultures across the Near East preserved traditions about heavenly councils, powerful intermediaries, giants, and dangerous knowledge. Ethiopian Christians preserved the complete book when most other traditions no longer possessed it. These facts establish the importance of Enoch. They do not establish that its supernatural events occurred literally. The mainstream scholarly view remains cautious. Most researchers see the book as a collection of writings composed across different periods. Its stories reflect ancient theology, cultural memory, scriptural interpretation, and concern about the origins of evil. The identity of the Son of Man remains disputed. The date of the similitudes remains debated. The connection between Enoch and the final judge remains unresolved. And this is where the mystery survives. Perhaps the fallen angels feared Enoch because he alone could enter the heavenly court. Perhaps they feared the judgment he represented. Or perhaps the final form of the book transformed him from a human scribe into something far greater. If the story was intended literally, it presents a universe where rebellion carries consequences even celestial beings cannot escape. If it was symbolic, it reveals an ancient warning about knowledge without wisdom, power without restraint, and intelligence without moral responsibility. Either way, the Watchers feared more than punishment. They feared the moment when every secret would be brought into the light.